Before I start the video, I'd like to add a trigger warning. This video involves sensitive topics such as trauma, sexual, emotional, mental, and physical abuse, and graphic imagery. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, this is Vamp Gore, aka your favorite weird goth nerd, and today I'm going to be talking about traumacore. Now, what is traumacore? Traumacore is actually not an aesthetic, but art therapy or inventing art or visual journaling for those who experience trauma and abuse, mainly sexual trauma and child sexual abuse. But emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual abuse is also common themes in traumacore, as well mental illnesses. The core part is a suffix. Suffix is an affix occurring at the end of a word, base, or phrase. Example would be lis, ing, or li, etc. Furthermore, most people create this or turn these images into something to cope with their pain in the past. It's usually more focused on trauma experienced in childhood, hence why the cute visuals. However, adult trauma can also be covered. Traumacore usually blends disturbing concepts with innocent childlike imagery, essentially combining the unsettling with the innocent. Key elements of traumacore are trauma, nostalgia, childhood, innocence and the loss of it, abandonment, religion, dolls, angels, dirt, rot, mold, blood, death, and guts. It also involves some factors of liminal spaces for the childhood nostalgia type of vibe, as trauma often happens during childhood. Nostalgia core example of this would be serial characters like Hello Kitty, childhood bedrooms, playgrounds, and other places and things related to childhood. Religious themes such as crosses, angels, and mentions of heaven or hell. Dreamcore, weirdcore, Sarahcore, Marut. I'll talk about the aesthetic a bit later. And rotting aesthetic, which is imagery of bugs, dirt, and mold. Traumacore usually uses soft and girlish themes, but that's not always the case. Like, for example, males from the community would tend to use more masculine colors and themes. 3 types of traumacore art I've seen was 1. A disturbing image under a picture of a porcelain doll or a cartoon character, mainly Hello Kitty. 2. Just a dark phrase with a cute visual. 3. Pictures of liminal spaces with negative words repeating sometimes. Also, sometimes the artist would add silhouettes. This could relate to depersonalization or derealization disorder, as well PTSD or trauma. Depersonalization are occurrences of unreality or detachment from one's mind, self, or body. People might feel as if they're outside their bodies and watching events happening to them, while derealizations are occurrences of unreality or detachment from one's surrounding. A person with this disorder might feel like things and people around them aren't real. The silhouettes could also be stand-ins where the artist was during the time or where the abuser was. Negative words and phrases that are often used in traumacore are "I'm broken, I'll never be clean, you used me, rotten child, please stop, you ruined me, don't touch me." This is a reflection of the artist's inner thoughts and feelings about themselves and their experiences, the aftermath of their emotions they're having due to the abuse they've been through. In addition, the words that the artist wish they could say to their abuser. It's a side that they've been hiding for a while and don't usually talk about with their peers. They feel like they can't be fixed, hence why there's negative words and phrases. It's like writing down how you feel on a piece of paper, except on a visual form, onto a screen that's easier to understand. There's also "I'm sorry" and "please don't leave me," depending on the experience the artist had. It could be a feeling of abandonment or guilt. There's also some where they quote their abuser, for example this image here, but it's mostly about the artist's feelings and their view on their trauma. In the early 2010s, before traumacore became well known, the Tumblr community combined various tags such as #creepy, #cute, #vintage, etc., and it became an aesthetic called Marut. The Marut aesthetic had the same idea with traumacore. Both combined delicate and sweet imagery with dark subject matter related to depression, suicide, eating disorder, child sexual abuse, religious abuse, and abusive relationships. However, a lot of the elements related to traumacore today weren't there yet. Sero and weirdcore imagery didn't appear, and it was more of dark images such as gore. The aesthetic was slightly different from traumacore as it had more common elements of medical horror, Southern Gothic, and Victorian imagery such as medical instruments and textbooks, disturbing larvae, butterfly-like monsters, conjoined twins, and daguerreotypes, as well horror movie imagery such as Ouija boards, female ghost, porcelain dolls, and serial killer dressed men. In addition with Cult Party K, which was a Japanese vintage fashion, focusing on religious imagery as well, had many sheer layers. It later spread to America at the time. After the Maroon aesthetic started to fall out during the mid-2010s, users from Tumblr got more drawn towards traumacore, and now there's a community about it. I couldn't find who exactly created traumacore as a whole while I was doing my research, so if anyone knows, comment down below. Even though this helps cope with trauma and mental illnesses, there's a possibility that some people in the community are afraid to get professional help. This is because they got used to the feeling and getting comfortable with their unsolved trauma they had, got used to the issue and feeling sick that they're scared to see the world in a different way. In addition, others think that traumacore affects mental health in a bad way due to bringing negative messages out from the abuser or experiences and emotions to light, and possibly causing flashbacks, panic attacks, suicidal thoughts, and psychotic episodes. I came across this Tumblr post by Friendly Neighborhood Papergay about reasons traumacore is not art therapy, nor is it therapeutic as a whole. I found it interesting since it gave me a different perspective on traumacore. I'll link the post in the description below. Also, a few people outside the community think that it's just edgy and romanticizing trauma, and that's about it. I'll go a little bit more in depth about that later in the video. However, there are people in the community and people outside the community that think that's fine to create this type of art, as it actually helps people cope due to therapy not always being accessible to everyone. It's an alternative that people can go to. Here's a post on Tumblr by Sickly Angel. I'll read what she said because she does have a point about how traumacore isn't trying to glorify trauma. Hi, reminder that traumacore isn't an aesthetic or romanticism. It's vent art and a form of coping. Artistic expression isn't glorification. Just because someone makes art out of their struggles and trauma doesn't mean they're glorifying it. Stop telling trauma survivors and those with mental disorders that their form of coping is wrong. Stop telling them that they cannot put their feelings into art. Traumacore is a healthy coping mechanism, so stop dictating those who use it. It's invalidating and disgusting. There's also a comment on Reddit explaining how traumacore is basically sharing artwork about trauma for those who've been through it. This way, they won't feel alone. They also mentioned that some people have bad parents that don't care about their mental health, hence why they use traumacore to cope. I'll link the comment in the description below since it's long. I've decided to create a pros and cons list for this section. So my pros are it's a way to cope and express your deep emotions, and you get to meet people and make friends with those who probably can relate to your trauma and understand the things you've been through. However, the cons are you might feel afraid to get professional help, and the art might be triggering to some people, leading them to make them feel worse. But to be honest, it depends on the person because it may not help some people. However, traumacore can help others to cope. Again, everyone's form of coping is different. So just because this helps you doesn't mean it will help another person. Traumacore as a whole doesn't romanticize abuse or mental illnesses. Just because people create art about trauma doesn't mean they think that abuse is okay. It's not supposed to be aesthetically pleasing, but disturbing for those who didn't experience abuse or don't have any mental illnesses. The quote, art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. That's how traumacore is supposed to be, comforting for those who've been through trauma and disturb those who didn't. However, it's considered romanticizing if a person makes traumacore art but haven't been through abuse or have any mental illnesses and calls it an aesthetic. It's not meant to be quirky, edgy, for attention, or to fit in a certain aesthetic. There are aesthetics which combine both dark and cute stuff together like pastel goth, but traumacore shouldn't be used as an aesthetic. There are some people that paint depression, eating disorders, sexual abuse, etc. as a beautiful concept and possibly seek out experiences like those, which would endanger their health and invalidate the experiences of those who experience trauma and wouldn't want anyone to go through that. Hence why traumacore is only for people who have a history of being abused or have any mental illnesses, and not for people who want to experience that. As well, cross-tagging, which is adding non-related trauma hashtags such as hashtag Sero, hashtag aesthetic, hashtag pastel, etc. to a traumacore post. It can be harmful and romanticizing a serious problem. In addition, few, not all, from the DDLG community fetishize this. DDLG stands for Daddy Dom Little Girl. It's a sexual role-play relationship where there's a dominant male that plays as a dad figure and a woman that plays as a little girl. DDLG isn't supposed to equal traumacore. They shouldn't be mixed together because one fetishizes abuse and another vents about it. Both should be separated, and they're literally different things. One is a type of BDSM and another is a type of vent art. Reddit has a thread called traumacore, which you can join. Tumblr, I think you have to find tags like vent art and trauma, etc. because I tried to search up traumacore and I wasn't allowed to get in. Typing traumacore on Discord and searching it up there, or any Discord servers that talk about trauma and venting. I think Weethearted and Nemo has traumacore communities there as well. I asked my friends what's their opinion on traumacore and whether if it's romanticizing trauma or not, and all my friends, by the way, haven't been in the traumacore community, so yeah. Kem said that it's amusing and it gives off a strange deja vu vibe, and they don't think it's romanticizing trauma, but representing what trauma can cause and what it could look like. Another friend of mine, Moni Sheikh, the one who actually asked me how traumacore affects the discussion around mental health, she thought it was an aesthetic and how it could do more harm due to it desensitizing trauma, mental illnesses, and EDs. It may help people cope, but it could also lead to romanticizing. Then I brought up the fact that it's actually vent art and the core part is just a suffix and it's meant for those who've been through trauma. She later said that if it was a community where people with trauma can seek others like them and cope, then it's a good thing. However, if there are people outside of the community that didn't experience trauma join and invalidate people or fetishize having trauma by calling it baggage or being broken, and they end up making the people with trauma feeling misunderstood or not valid with their experience with trauma, then it's bad. But it's not the fault of those that experience trauma making it that way. Maria said how it's overall a good way to cope with trauma as well. You don't feel alone. And finally, Kwan said it's cute but kind of psycho. Crying emoji. I don't have a problem with traumacore. If anything, I actually like it. From a person that experienced trauma, it feels comforting in a way. If you're making traumacore art and you haven't yourself suffered from trauma or abuse, then you're romanticizing it and you should leave the community and stop making traumacore art. There's a reason why this isn't an aesthetic. If it was, then it would have been romanticizing mental illnesses and abuse, because aesthetic means something that's pleasing to look at and trauma isn't something to be pleased about. Hence why the core part is a suffix and it's considered art therapy. If you have experienced trauma and prefer expressing your feelings by art, then you can try it. Also, if you're gonna post traumacore art online, don't use hashtag Sero, hashtag Hello Kitty, or hashtag cute. Just use hashtag traumacore or hashtag traumacore art. I actually see traumacore as shadow work. Shadow work is revealing parts that you hide, which can include trauma or a part of your personality that you don't like with your unconscious mind. I left an article about it in the description below. Also, if you have any unsolved trauma or you feel unwell, please don't get scared to get help. If you have the chance to go to therapy, go there. Trust me, it's better to get actual help than looking for alternatives. As well, be with people that want you to get better, rather than people that don't care about you or make you feel worse. This was a long video to make, not only because there's so much information I had to get, but due to a lot of stuff happening in my life, I had to delay it. I put some hotlines down in the description below if you guys need to seek any help. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video as well, learned something new about traumacore and mental health, and I'll see you guys later. Take care, drink some blood, see ya.